WVUA Law Call is up right after the news. Host Terri Brewer has details. Good evening, Terri.
Good evening, Claire. Tonight we'll be taking your calls on workers' compensation. Joining me each week and every week is attorney Bob Prince of the Prince Glover Law Group, and he'll be helping to answer your questions tonight.
In Alabama, if you get injured on the job and you work for a company that has over 4 employees, you can't sue them for negligence. If you want to know what your rights are, watch the show tonight. Or if you think you have a workman's comp claim and you have a question, call us. We'll answer your calls live.
And that's right. If you have a question about workers' compensation, you can call us. Our phone lines are now opening up. It's 205-348-WVUA. That's 205-348-9882. Stay with us. WVUA Law Call starts right after the news. Back to you all at the news desk.
This is WVUA Law Call.
Welcome to WVUA Law Call. I'm your host, Terri Brewer, and each week we'll be discussing a different legal topic and taking your legal questions live on the air. Tonight our topic is workers' compensation. The phone lines are now open, and if you have a question, you can give us a call. That number is 205-348-WVUA. That's 205-348-9882. But before we go to those phone lines, let's see what's on the docket for the next few weeks on WVUA Law Call. Next week, you get to try to stump our attorneys as we open the topic to whatever you choose. You can ask us anything. And then the next week, unfortunately, Cupid's arrow may not always bring happiness. So on February 12th, we'll focus on love and the law. Then on February 19th, get your questions ready for traffic accidents on WVUA Law Call. And on the panel tonight and every Sunday night from the Prince Glover Law Group is attorney Bob Prince. Bob, thank you for being with us again tonight.
Terri, thank you. It's my pleasure.
And tell me about workers' compensation. Is this something you get a lot of questions about?
We do, Terri. We do get a lot of questions about workers' comp. We get a lot of calls about them, and they're injuries, but they're injuries on the job, and they have some very peculiar and specific rules that we have to go by.
So I guess that's why we have an expert here tonight.
We do. Last week we had a great show with Eric Wilson. This week we have another great show. We have Steve Ford as our guest tonight. Steve, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Terri, if I may, before the callers start, I'd love to tell the viewers something about Steve so they can get to know him a little bit better. He and his wife, Christine, have 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And that's right.
That keeps him busy right there,
yeah,
in addition to his practice.
Right. He went to the University of Alabama, and this is probably the fact about him that the viewers will like the most. He played football for Coach Bryant, and he was on the 1973 National Championship team. So congratulations on that. He went on to law school and was a founding member of the firm here of Ford, Martin, and Abernathy. And he's a good, God-fearing man. And he's a good father, and I can tell you he's a great lawyer. In workers' compensation, Terri, when that word is mentioned, his name always comes up. He literally wrote the book on workers' compensation.
And he's probably got some fans out there already because he played for Coach Bryant.
That's right.
So
it's been a long time.
That's pretty good. So, well, let's get started. Tonight we're talking about workers' compensation. So if you have a question about that, you can call us at 205-348-WVUA. That's 205-348-9882. Let's go ahead and get to the phone lines. On the line first, we have Ron from Tuscaloosa. Ron, thank you for calling us. What's your question for us?
Hello?
I believe that's Brian from Tuscaloosa. Brian, are you on the line?
Oh, yes, I am.
Go ahead with your question.
Okay, my question is, you say that the laws are different in workers' compensation. If you are injured on a job due to faulty equipment and you have reported this equipment to your supervisors and they still made you use this equipment, and would that be grounds for a workers' compensation lawsuit or a regular lawsuit? What's the difference in the law? If you're injured on the job, I thought you're injured on the job.
Steve, is this the type of question? Is this a popular question, Brian's question?
It really is, and actually what you may have is 2 different cause of actions there. One is a workers' compensation case. If you have an injury by accident in the line of, in the course of your employment, you have a workers' compensation claim. You also may have a third-party claim. Now, Bob, this is something that obviously you're more familiar with, where you may have an action or a cause of action outside the Workers' Compensation Act. The Workers' Compensation Act is the exclusive remedy you have against your employer unless you fall into one of these narrow categories in which
That's
you can
right.
have a third-party claim.
That's right. The viewer mentioned faulty equipment, and if you have faulty equipment, the likelihood is that he would have a claim if it in fact was defective. So he could have a workers' comp claim and a suit outside of employment law.
And I have a question. When I hear workers' compensation, I think of someone hurt on the job because of something that the employer did. What if it's something that you do on the job that leads to your injury? Are you still eligible for workers' compensation?
You are, but I'm going to let Steve answer this
Tell us
question.
that one.
You know, that's a very common question. Actually, workers' compensation is a faultless remedy. In other words, it doesn't matter who's at fault. Even if the injured worker is at fault, you still have a workers' compensation claim. It's not based on fault at all. If you're injured by accident arising out of in the course of employment, you have a workers' compensation claim. But the recovery is much, much different than what people normally think of in a liability case or an accident case.
That was a question that I was going to have. I know, Bob, you work with personal injury a lot,
Right.
traffic accidents. How is a workers' comp claim different from a personal injury, like in a traffic accident?
Well, I'll tell you what you can get outside of workman's comp, and Steve can talk about a workers' comp case. If it's we represented a police officer who got injured on the job, and he had two claims. He had a workers' comp claim, but he had a regular lawsuit. In his regular lawsuit, we went for pain and suffering and that type of injury, which I don't think you can get over there. I'll let Steve speak to that, but we went for that and lost wages. And can you get pain and suffering in workers' comp?
No, you can't. In a liability case, Bob, as you mentioned, you recover damages. You have to prove fault and prove that you're not at fault, and you recover general damages, which is pain, suffering, and mental anguish, actual lost income, medical bills and medical expenses and care, possibly punitive damages, loss of enjoyment of life.
Right.
A spouse has a claim for loss of consortium. In a workers' compensation case, you do not collect damages. You recover benefits. And there's three benefits under the Workers' Compensation Act. The first is the medical benefit, which is a lifetime benefit, a very important benefit, but you have to go to your authorized doctor, and the authorized doctor has to relate his care to the on-the-job injury. The second benefit is the compensation benefit, which is the money that goes to the injured worker. That is based solely on percent of impairment or disability, and it's handled by formulas. And the third benefit is vocational benefit, which is possibly retraining the person in the workforce.
And let's go back to our phone lines, but first I want to give you the numbers. If you're out there and you have a question about workers' compensation, it's 205-348-WVUA. That's 205-348-9882. But we've got Steve from Tuscaloosa on the line. Steve, thank you for calling us. What's your question for our attorneys tonight?
My question is, when you've had a workman's comp claim and you've had your surgery or whatever and you've received your payment, you go back to work and you've reached your maximum medical improvement, are you always eligible for a permanent partial disability if you've lost any of your functions, or is that just sometimes you're eligible for that?
What about Steve's question?
I believe I understood him what he said. If you have when you're injured off the job and then you go back to the job, you don't always have a permanent impairment or disability, but most likely you do. If in fact you have surgery, then almost 100% of the time you will have some type of impairment or disability. There are some exceptions to that, but primarily that's the general rule.
Well, stay with us. We'll have much more of your questions about workers' compensation when WVUA Law Call returns. We're talking about workers' compensation tonight on Law Call. If you have a question for our attorneys, Bob Prince and Steve Ford, you can call us at 205-348-WVUA. That's 205-348-9882. But let's go back to our phone lines now. We have Larry in Tuscaloosa on the line. Larry, thank you for calling us. What's your question for Bob and Steve tonight?
Well, the first question I would like to know is, if I settle in court for a $30,000 settlement, isn't that I'm probably for